You can go ahead. If you want to, I have either or is fine with me. Let me build it up. I can pull it up if you want.
I have it. I have it.
Okay, go ahead. All right.
So this talk actually flows very well with what we have discussed in this morning. So you build your community and what are the roles they're going to have in your project. And that's brings us to building an effective co-authorship team. And it's so important that you start this early and be very candid who will do what, how much, and come up with the order of the authorship, because sometimes it breaks friendship, sometimes it breaks those communities that we have discussed about. So really talking about this and understanding what it means is very important, because when you will be academicians, we are our work, we are our publication. So when you are not acknowledged at the appropriate level, it hurts you. It hurts your promotion. It hurts you intellectual ownership to what you have created. So it is very important in the academic arena, even though it is in other arenas as well. So today we will discuss what is an author, contributor, and a reviewer, and the differences where your name appears, whether it's a lead author, whether it's a senior author, whether it's a co-author in the middle, and how to manage difficult medicating co-authorship. And that will be discussed more by Dr. Williams. She has few cases. Some of them she has been exposed to those difficult situations, and what would you do if you were in that situation? And we can discuss how to strategize to build that co-authorship more effectively. So let's get started. So how do we define a author? And we do not have to do that. International Committee of Medical Journal Editors has already have criteria for that. And that's 4 criteria. You have to have substantial contributions to the conception and the design of the work, and the analysis of the work, and then the interpretation. So these people, this could be done by 1 person, or it could be done by 3 persons. For example, the analysis, it could be a statistician, and you may be the have the idea. You have, it's your conception of the idea. So it could be, this could be several people, or it could be the people who are revising it critically and giving you important feedback on the content, or they have the final approval of the version that it's going to be published. And when you're on the paper, you have accountability for the all parts of the work that is going to be presented there, and that you consent that the accuracy and for the accuracy and integrity of that work. So you need to have all these components for it to be an author on a paper. And if they don't fit this bill, then they could be acknowledged in the paper, not as an author. At the end of every paper, you know that there's an acknowledgement portion. You can add them there. So how is the peer review process occur when you finish your Merit portal publication? What's going to be happening? First, you have to write it, of course, and then have this order of your authors. So the corresponding author, depending on the field or your understanding when you are strategizing who will be the author. It could be the first author, it could be the senior author, or this person could be the same depending on the journal and depending even in the field that you are in. And corresponding author is the person liaison between all of these people and the editorial office. Once the paper goes to the editorial office, to Method Portal, it's going to be assigned to an associate editor. And there will be reviewers who will provide recommendation to the associate editor. Associate editor themselves also go through their own conclusion of the paper. They include the reviewers and they make a final recommendation to the editor. Editor is the last person to make that decision, and then it will be published. Of course, if the editor decide that we accept the paper, there is I mean, I have never seen, maybe it happened to Dr. Sanchez or Dr. Williams, but I never had a paper that came with an acceptance at first. It's minor revision if I am the luckiest person, a little bit less lucky, but still very good. Major revision, reject with possibility, and Method Portal has the associate editors have also even taken the role of being mentor to tell you why we are rejecting it and what improvements you can do that you can come back making those changes and submit again. And if it doesn't fit the bill completely, then we have rejection. And if those who contributed, and we're going to talk who is a contributor, you will acknowledge them. They're not going to be in this list. So it's going to be at the end of the paper. And then again, whenever you have a question, please stop me and we can answer your questions. So lead author, corresponding author, and senior author. So these authors, it could be the same person or it could be two different person, depending again on the area, but they are responsible for overall content and the flow of the article and making those revisions once you hear from the editor and addressing all of the expectation or what we call a rebuttal, that some of them you want to do it and some of them you say, you know, I have to say that I disagree with this, and then you give them a rebuttal why you don't want to do those changes, and you prepare that letter before you send it back for revision. And you know, it's the person who is responsible and take the ownership of the submission. So if some authors, and you hear on the for example, the Stanford president recently resigned as a president because 10 years ago some of the publications went without thorough integrity. And sometimes what happens is that those people have so many people working for them and they are the final author, but they do not analyze it well. But at the end of the day, it's not the middle person who is going to be fired. It's your work. You take the senior authorship, it's your work. You are responsible every part of that work and every word that is written there. So it's an important responsibility, but it's also very in both ways. It will really elevate you and will put you in the area of expertise by having papers with senior authorship. Okay, we were here. So co-authors, they're going to participate in your paper, but they're not, they did not conceive the idea. They're not really sponsoring the program that what you're doing, but they are helping you, and they can be the statistician when you collect your data to analyze it. It could be that you are going to collect the data and it's the data manager, or it could be you're delivering something and then you're their supervisor. So they are participating. They're doing work on behalf of you, but they don't have the full ownership of that paper. So they're going to be co-authors, and they can be the second, third, and fourth, and there are different ways of going, who will be second, who will be third, etc. And we'll talk about that too. So senior author, it's conceived the idea, and they obtain the funds, and they have a supervisory role. For sciences, we have big grants, and we then train many people on that grant. A single student will take the leadership to carry part of that project, and that student is going to be the first author. But if I am the PI, principal investigator, and I do all these things, I will be then the senior author. So again, sometimes that senior author and corresponding author, they can be a little bit shady depending on the field that you're going to work in. In education, senior author and the corresponding author are usually the same person. So contributors, for example, I will tell you, if you have a pathological image and a colleague provides you, which is very important for your work, that's a contributor that you're going to acknowledge. You will say that we kindly provided the image for our article. So that they are going to be a contributor. They can just help you with the writing or the language editing or proofreading. They could be your administrator in your department that will be doing that. They will be contributor. They can provide feedback, but you just go and talk, doctor, I'm working on this project, and what do you think about this? And they give you an idea, but not really contributing as much as that will lead to full authorship for them. You always have to acknowledge your funding agency, and so your funding agency will be your school, but also you should acknowledge BingApp at the end of each one of your MEDET portal, because it's through this program that you are able to create that MEDET portal publication. Reviewer. A reviewer could be the reviewer or the or once it goes to the publication office or the MEDET portal, but it could be an internal reviewer that you give to a colleague to read it for, because they have expertise in the area to give you a feedback before you submit it. So they look at to the quality, completeness, and accuracy. They provide critical feedback. They suggest improvement, and they can. They're not going to tell you if should be accepted or rejected at that time. But if it's the MEDET portal, that's our job. We make a recommendation whether it should be accepted, whether it's going to require revision. So these reviewers could be internal within your school, or before it goes to MEDET portal, or after it goes to MEDET portal. And a good reviewer internally, if they see that it's not ready, they should tell you not to try. That will be an honest feedback telling you you need to do work before you get there. I know how MEDET portal submission works. You need to change this. You need to add this to your pre and post test, etc. And we do that a lot. I mean, as part of the being a program, as your advisors and mentors, and JP individually also goes through every one of those work that you're going to produce and provide very good feedback to you. So as we said, it's so important. Once, I'm sorry, my laptop has its own, I restarted it. Okay, I'm going to leave it here. It's really, I don't know what's going on.
Do you mean with the slide set?
No. My mouse is just moving things around. We did this, okay.
I could pull up my version of it, maybe.
Okay, because
case
I don't know. It's just moving on its own. I have no idea why.
All right, so we're on the case discussions. Let me pull up my version. You can stop sharing. I will start sharing. Make sure I pull up the right thing. And let's do slideshow. Everyone could see?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to do some case discussions. Specifically, all these scenarios are real life scenarios. And I want the group to ask, or, what would you do? Any questions on what Dr. Abali has mentioned so far? I see someone saying no. I think the one thing I've learned is it's really important to discuss authorship early on. I'm working with an intern right now. Well, I guess he's a PGY2, he's not an intern anymore. And he's applying for gastroenterology. And the one thing I'm very impressed with him is I have him and another PGY2 writing a paper. And from the beginning, he said, can we discuss authorship, which I thought was very mature of him for someone who's literally out of medical school, because it can get really dicey and antsy at the end. So I think before you even start writing, when you start a project, just say, how are we going to do authorship? Extremely important, because that way people's feelings aren't getting hurt, and it gets really tricky, especially when you're dealing with trainees. So here's some case discussions. How would you handle these situations? So situation one, so she mentioned earlier, senior author is the person that has the idea. So one faculty member has an idea, but another faculty member supervises, sorry, I gotta move people out of the way. Supervised and implemented the project. At the end of the project, the faculty member who had the original idea insists on being the senior author, while the faculty member who supervised gets middle authorship. So to give more context, the faculty member who supervised oversaw the house staff, the residents, looked at the data, met with them, did everything, analyzed the data. What would you do? Really, the second faculty member really drove the project.
Well, Dr. Williams, like you said before, I think, like one of the things you can do early on is preventative, like discussing the authorship, like as soon as like you've conceived the idea and you've assembled your team. Now, obviously, to me, I feel like that supervising faculty should be the senior author on this project. I don't know if this is how you wrote the situation, but usually there's a hierarchy, at least in surgery. I mean, I'm a surgeon, I'm from the Department of Surgery. There's a hierarchy. And if like the senior author, like who conceived the idea was a chairperson, like it's kind of hard to then manage that situation.
So in this case, me and my colleague were peers. I was a supervising faculty member. I'll tell you what I did in the end.
I think you have a frank conversation with the person who had the idea but didn't do the implementation and talk about the allocation of labor, and say that the person that was managing, feels that they have the lion's share of the work to have the senior authorship.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? I mean, how many people? I can't see how many people we have on.
Curious as to why middle authorship, as opposed, like, was there somebody else involved who was going to take lead author, and could you separate that, the person who did the supervision and implementation could be lead author with mentorship from the person who had the idea, or maybe the supervisor with the idea really takes leadership on the writing of the manuscript, or, you know, provide other opportunities for that person to become more involved, even though they weren't involved in the implementation of, you know, whatever project it was.
So I'll explain some more. So this project was a quality improvement project, and the first author was a resident that was applying into gastroenterology. For those outside of medicine, GI is the most competitive fellowship in medicine right now. It's about a 63% match rate, and research and first authorship is extremely important. And I felt that if the resident did all this work, they should be first author. The second author was a GI fellow who had applied for a patient care grant, who got the grant that supported the project that we did. So I felt they should be first and second author appropriately. But to be honest, I did a lion's share of the work in terms of making sure things ran smoothly. Like, I'm a finisher, I guess that's the easiest way to put it. My colleague, not so much. Anyone else? Wasn't accurate, that person who did the work and the person who created the idea and created the. Yeah, I see what Will said. There's like 3 Will Chavez's on here, but thank you. So I will tell you what I did. I folded. I just let it go. Because at the time when I brought it up to my colleague, who I love, I think is a great person, the response was, well, it was my idea. And I think, you know, this was years ago. What kind of ended up burning me in the end, again, doesn't matter because I just got promoted to full professor anyways, that this got published in one of our top 5 journals, high impact journal, top 5 journals. And I think in retrospect, I guess I didn't know any better. I should have said, listen, if we're going to write this up, I'm going to be either first author or last author. So I think in retrospect, I should have just come in as the first. But I just really strongly felt that the resident who was applying to GI would have been more beneficial to them at the time. At that time, I was an assistant professor. So I didn't think, you know, as someone who's going to go for promotion, you need the first authorship. So to this day, I'm still like, you know, it's one of our top journals and you're kind of in the middle. I was a corresponding author. But as a faculty member, I arranged all the meetings, you know, helped with data analysis, helped write a paper, while the senior author, it was that person's idea, but they wasn't really fully involved. So I think what I would do differently now is go back and say, listen, if we're going to write this up, here's my labor of work. So when it happened again with another project, I actually stopped working with this faculty member because I realized the division of labor just wasn't the same. When this happened again with another project we went to publication, I actually fought for my senior author spot. And I think I said something to the effect of, well, what did you do? Well, if you could give me what you did. It was an uncomfortable conversation, but I had to say, listen, I put a lot of time and effort into this. This is not happening to me a second time. I just was like, what did you do? We're still friends. Don't worry about it.
I had one, I don't know how much this applies to the GI world. I have seen some in medical education of like co-first authors or co-lead authors, so that, you know, maybe in this case, going back in time, you and the resident could have potentially been co-lead authors, so that you both get that recognition and credit, so to speak.
Yes, I think some places do it. Not all journals have co-first authors. A piece of advice someone said to me at the time, and I don't know how many house staff are on this call, is don't give residents first authorship spots. And it's interesting because I feel like if the resident does the work, they should get that spot, to be honest with you. But at the same time, the balance is, as a faculty member going for promotion, these also count. So I think if you're going to be first author, you should write the majority of the paper. But if the house staff writes the majority of the paper, then they should be the first author. But a friend of mine just generally never gives house staff first authorships. They give them second spots, but not first. I don't know how they do the writing part of it, to be honest with you. I've never asked. But I just feel like if you're writing most of the paper, you should be in the first spots. And I've kind of maintained that particular. And I also know people applying for fellowships. It really counts as a big thing for them. But in the essence, what you end up doing as a faculty member, you're kind of like also disadvantaging yourself when you go for promotion, because first and senior authorship spots really make a difference. So I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest with you. I'm not sure what the group thinks.
In sciences, you know, being an advisor is to really raise the next generation of leaders. So as a graduate student, you do the work, you write the work. Of course, it's your advisor's idea maybe at the beginning, but you bring it to a different place, and your advisor's job is to teach you to write. So when I did my work, I was always the first author, and my advisor was the senior author. As I got higher in his lab, he allowed me to be a co-senior author, or in some papers, because then I was helping other students to do their work, to be the first co-authors. And you can do that in MEDET portal. In the last MEDET portal submission, 2 students were the first co-authors, and actually the MEDET portal Binga fellow was the senior author. So she did not take the first authorship, but she took the senior author position and let the students do most of the work, and she oversee the work.
Yeah,
So it could play differently.
Yeah, I think I should also add that. So what happened is when we originally submitted this to the journal, they were very interested in it, but they had us submit it to a special section which required reformatting the article. So I pretty much rewrote the whole thing and reformatted it. And I guess in retrospect, I should have said to the house staff, you know what, since I had to rewrite this to fit the new version of it, because they were publishing in a specific section of the journal, and we're like, sure, we're going to take it because it's just a top journal. Then I had to sit there and actually rewrite and do a lot of editing. But you know, in the end, it was what it was. As I said, I still made it to my promotion. So, but I believe if someone puts the work in, they should get the spot appropriate to them. Situation number, yeah, I'm very big on that. Situation number 2. I mean, now as a, you know, I'm further on in my career. I was pretty early then. I'm kind of like, I'm going to be senior author. So I, you know, the work is going to fall on someone else. A resident implements a project and does a bulk of the work and writing. Gets told by the supervising faculty that they will be middle author, while a fellow who didn't contribute as much will be first author. This happened to one of my mentees. What would you do? This is a resident applying for gastroenterology. Of course, everyone's applying for GI because that's what I do. My mentee comes to me and she's like, listen, I'm in a situation. I wrote this up. And Dr. So-and-so is telling me, who's my colleague, that I'm going to be middle.
I think as a mentor and an advocate for the resident, I probably go to the supervising faculty and tell him or her what the resident told me and advocate for this resident to be the first author.
I did not do that, but I'll tell you what happened. I could sit here all day. I'm just gonna
Counsel the resident with what their goal is and how much they're willing to pay for making waves at this juncture in their career, and ask them how much, you know, like emotional investment and like how it would impact the trajectory of the career realistically, and try to mentor them around it, because they're all small communities and they can have large impacts.
exactly right. That's true. Very small world, especially if you're a woman, or identify as a woman, I should say. So what ended up happening in this case is I knew my colleague was someone reasonable. So I actually told the resident, I said, you know, you should speak to her and let her know what happened, and just advocate for yourself. I didn't advocate for her because I just wanted her to, you know, this was a colleague who I knew very, very well. And she spoke to the colleague, who then spoke to the fellow, and the fellow, to their credit, he admitted that he did not do a bulk of the work. So this was also published, and the resident got the first authorship spot. So in that case, it worked out fine, but she was very upset, and, you know, she felt there's a power imbalance when you're a faculty member. And I said, I can do this for you, but I also know this person. I know the person very well, and they're very reasonable, and they're very fair. They probably did not recognize that you were doing the bulk of the work and thought the fellow drove the project. And once the fellow, also to their credit, was very open and honest about the amount of work they did or did not do. So in the end, the resident got the first authorship spot, but the faculty just didn't know.
Yeah, I think if you think your gut feeling is telling that this is not fair, whether you have a mentor who tells you to talk or not, you should talk. The same thing happened to me. I was a graduate student and we had physicians coming to our lab. I was at Sloan Kettering at that time, and he was a fellow there, like assistant professor there. And he told me that I have a lot of opportunity because I am just a graduate student, that I will be authors on the other ones. And he's still a good friend of mine. I didn't feel that it was right. And I went and talked with my advisor, and he did, my friend did not make a big deal out of it. So you should, if you see unfairness, you should speak out and you know, get help.
So alternatively, I'll tell you this project, this happened to two of my residents, one in my institution, one of my mentees outside of my institution. I'm not sure if we're using, and funny enough is it Dr. Haynes? Yeah. To your point, my second advice to the other person was more along what you said. It was, and in that case, it was a young faculty member. My mentee came to me and she was like, listen, I wrote this project. The assistant professor wants to have the first authorship spot because for her, it counts towards promotion. She was at the time applying for GI, and it ended up that she left the, because of political reasons, she just kind of left the first author to be the faculty member, because I said to her the same thing. I said, listen, it's a very small world. You already have a strong application. You're applying in like 6 months. This is not worth, I mean, I get that you did a lot of work. I acknowledge you did a lot of work. I know you put your time and effort into this, but since you're applying into the fellowship, and people do talk, as we all know, people talk to each other behind the scenes. I don't think it's worth pushing this too much. So she already had another first authorship paper anyway. So she ended up being, not first on that paper. Or they may have done a co-first. I can't remember. But the faculty member specifically was just like, this counts more for me than it does for you because I am on a track and I need papers to be promoted. And I just said to her, it's not worth it when you're applying into the field in the next few months. It's just not worth it. So she ended up, she was not happy with that, but that was my advice in that instance, because I didn't know her faculty member. My mentee, my home institution, I knew the faculty member as a colleague who was also very fair. I couldn't speak to the person at the other place. It was another institution in New York City, but that's what happened. So it turns out it's variable, I think. But I think your point about be mindful of the political landscape and how much effort you're going to put into something that may come back and bite you in the hiney later on is actually very well taken. It sucks, but that's just the way this is.
I mean, I think those people have trends, so you should be watchful too, because it happened to me actually here with a colleague. I did all the work and it was very highly rated journal also. And I said, okay, I have a lot of publication. It's okay if I will be second. It doesn't matter. But then you see that the same trend repeats, and then I get upset. And it's not that it's happening to me, but it's happening to others. In the beginning, in the morning, I told you, all we do shows on our papers what you do. That's your resume. That's who you are. That's who identify with. So pick your fights, of course, but don't people to walk over you. If you need to fight, then fight and get what you have to do.
Well, I think, so what I do now, honestly, it's just in the beginning, we talk about authorship. It gets it out the way early on. Who's going to,
Yes.
and once, if you're going to be the first author, here's what you're writing. Once you figure out where you fall in the line, it determines the amount of work that you're going to do. It just makes life a lot easier.
Totally agree.
Any other comments before we go to the third and last scenario? Senior faculty member insists on being moved higher on the author list. This is not mine, even though they minimally contribute to the project. This is a friend of mine.
I have so much thoughts about this.
I think this is where it can be helpful that there are conventions and criteria for what authorship means, and really lean on those when you're approached by somebody who you don't necessarily feel made adequate contributions to move into those roles, and have that conversation similar to what you commented on earlier. Like, tell me, like, why do you think support your request with your input on the project, and hopefully they can help themselves recognize that that's not appropriate.
Rebecca, you touched on a very good point. Many journals now will ask every person who are on the paper with a justification of how much work they did and what they did, because they're aware of these scenarios happening and kind of trying to protect you.
You get curricular review of the manuscript and revision online. John, JP, you said you had some thoughts. And I'll state also that the two mentees I had were both people who are underrepresented in medicine. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, while their faculty members correspondingly so were not.
I mean, you sort of see it, it's a cultural element. I think times are changing. Where I did residency, I felt like if you put the chair on, even if the chair didn't do anything, you became favored and life just became a little bit easier. I think that hierarchical sentiment isn't as pervasive today. I still think you just have to be mindful of it. It doesn't have to be a chair of a department. Sometimes it's a division director. Like, for example, I think you just have to keep your eyes and ears open. So if that's the culture, be aware of it and approach the culture in a certain way to combat that. So if that is the persistent culture where the senior faculty member or chair is listed on every publication, you have to decide, are you going to fight that? And instead of fighting it, I would just recommend engaging them so they get a better idea of what they need to do to deserve that place, right? So if the culture is the chair is on every publication, well, then schedule time with the chair, have the chair make the appropriate contributions to deserve that co-authorship.
Yeah, we could spend an entire hour talking about politics and medicine and academia. But I think that's a good point. I think you need to know your audience, know your. I mean, I don't think where I am right now is very hierarchical, to be honest with you. I think you make a good point, and I think every field is very different, and I think every institution is very different, and the culture at different institutions are very different. You know, as a faculty member, my fellows call me by my first name, even though technically I'm mid-career. I guess I wouldn't call myself senior just yet. But you know, it's a first name basis where we have trainees from other programs where everyone gets called Dr. So-and-so. So I think you just have to know the culture of your place and what it is. But I think recognize politics do play a role. And I think if your chair is on needs to be the senior, he just has to be the senior. It's just not worth it to kind of go into that quagmire, in my opinion, depending on your space and depending on who your chair is.
And sometimes they'll say, well, I paid for you to do this fellowship. I paid for you to have a lab. I paid for you to have supplies. You know, you wouldn't be at this point. So I deserve recognition. But co-authorship on a publication goes beyond just giving financial or resources. They could be listed as a contributor in the acknowledgement section and just engage them to actually do the appropriate work for co-authorship.
Yeah, I think, you know, in essence, when you see someone with 200 papers, you're like, all right, you know, some of those you didn't do anything. Or 400 papers, I'm like, come on, dude. You've seen those people, those 400 publications. So I think in the end, strategically speaking, I think establish the author order prior to writing the paper, period, and done. It's uncomfortable to do it, but the more you do, the better it gets. And you figure out based on who's doing what, how much they're going to write. Resolve conflicts very early on because it can cause some tension. In the situation where I said I kind of fought for my senior authorship spot, it did cause some tension between me and my colleague. We got over it eventually, but the person was definitely upset with me about it. But at that point, I'm like, I'm not doing this twice over. It's just not happening again. But at that time, I was still an assistant professor, and I still just, now I know better how to resolve conflicts and just make sure you kill things early on. And as I mentioned, that intern, PGY2, just impressed me when he was like, okay, who's going to be first author on this paper? It's going to be me or the other resident. I said, it's going to be you. And we figured it out with the other residents. And divided writing appropriately. I think bulk I don't think the lead author has to write every single thing. I tend to like to, you write the bulk, but co-authors can write methods, results. It's just easier. Methods is easy. Results is just regurgitating data, but the bulk of it should be written by the lead author. Very important. And that should be the expectations. So I think next steps is you're not alone, find like-minded peers. Identify potential partners across the country who are, I guess in your institution, it says across the country, and leverage through personal connectedness, institutional missions, and accreditation standards and community needs. I'm not sure how that relates back to our talk, but this is in the slide set. And you can do things across institutions. I've worked with residents in Florida in cross-institutional research because we have residents who are in programs where they don't have a lot of access to people doing any kind of research, or just medical education research, and just, I can't be on their IRB, but I can be the senior in their space because I'm like giving them the directions on what to do. Thank you. I think that's it for that one.